Hey, Professor Wiseguy here in Mount Washington Cemetery, Independence, Missouri. I'm trying the best I can to figure out which way I'm going. Unfortunately, the GPS on my phone isn't really getting the job done, and, well, frankly, nobody around here is talking. Now, I have to admit that I've always enjoyed cemeteries, and I enjoy doing research on my deceased ancestors. You see, I'm a genealogy nerd. I've done this research over a number of years, and in the process, I've discovered a lot of interesting things, at least interesting to me. And I've also found some things that other people say that just aren't true. Am I descended from Pocahontas? Well, it's possible, but it's not by the steps that some distant cousins have suggested. Now, in those same years that I've been doing family history research, I've also been teaching research writing. Every semester I get to read a lot of really unworthy research papers. And recently I discovered that genealogy provides GPS for research-based writing. You see, a few years ago, the Board for Certification of Genealogists, and no, I didn't make that one up, they established the GPS. It's not the Global Positioning System, it's the Genealogical Proof Standard. This GPS has 5 elements, 5 tasks that you absolutely must do if you're going to reach and share good genealogical conclusions. Now, those same elements will help any researcher do work that is worth our time and effort. So let's look briefly at the 5 elements. Number 1 is reasonably exhaustive research. You thought that all research was exhausting, right? But we're not talking about exhausting research, we're talking about exhaustive research. Research that covers a reasonable amount of the available material. That's what we're talking about. Now, if I just pick the first 10 sources that pop up on Google, I'm going to have 2 problems. First, I'm not going to see everything there is to see, and second, I'm probably not going to see the 10 best sources that there are to see. Number 2 is complete, accurate citations to the source or sources of each information item. These genealogists think that documentation or citations are just as important as do English teachers who want you to use MLA style or something like that. And it's true. Documentation does several things for you, no matter what you're researching. It provides credibility for your work. It allows other people to go back and verify your work. It lets other people follow up your work and go farther. And it lets you go back and know where you got this thing you think you know. Okay, that's number 2. Number 3, it tests through processes of analysis and correlation all of our sources, information items, and evidence. I know people in genealogy who aren't really doing research. They're doing scrapbooking. They take this detail and that fact and this document and that photograph and they stick them all together in a book or a file or whatever. Well, that's nice collecting, but it's not research. When you do genuine research, you don't just grab a bunch of sources and throw part of them at the reader. No, you read those things and you think about them. You compare them. You ask questions about them. Only then do we have the right to draw conclusions about them or call ourselves researchers. Right. Number 4, resolution of conflicts among evidence items. Sounds like a winner, doesn't it? I have an ancestor who did the strangest thing between 2 of our 10-year censuses. He actually got younger. Most people age 10 years over a 10-year span, right? But this guy got younger. I have good sources that say he was born in 1809 and ones that say he was born in 1811, plus the outliers that say he was born in 1825. How do I proceed? I could simply ignore the inconvenient conflicts, or I could work hard to figure out which one was right. In both of these cases, I've managed to compare my sources to arrive at a conclusion that I believe is correct, but I haven't done it by ignoring anything. Good research writing on any topic requires us to deal with the conflicts and the contradictions. Any writing, researched or otherwise, that doesn't deal with the varying views is wasting my time as a reader. It's dishonest. That brings us to number 5. Soundly reasoned, coherently written conclusion. Only after I have done the first 4 tasks do I really have the right to put my conclusions on paper. And when I do write these things down, it will not just be a dump of all the materials I've accumulated. Instead, it's going to reflect my thought processes. It'll tell you why my conclusions are correct and how I arrived at them. When I'm repeating the conclusions of somebody else, it might very well explain why those conclusions are correct. Also, until I write things down, I haven't really completed my research. Good research deserves and requires a written conclusion. Standing here in the cemetery, I realized that I could make a functional gravestone with a piece of wood, some cardboard, and a Sharpie. It would get me by for a while, but it really wouldn't do the job. Similarly, when you do crummy research, failing to take seriously any of these 5 GPS steps, you're going to produce a crummy product. It might get you by, but it won't really achieve anything of value. On the other hand, if you do quality research, taking seriously all 5 GPS elements, then you're going to get where you want to be and you'll create something that's impressive. And it's not just going to grab a grade, but it'll make you proud for years to come. Now, with that introduction out of the way, let's dig deeper to the first of these steps. This time, I want to look at the first of the 5 elements in the Genealogical Proof Standard, or GPS, to see how it applies to the sort of research you might do. Step number 1 is reasonably exhaustive research. I have this ancestor, my 3rd great-grandfather. What do I know about him? He was named Philip Snyder. I think he was born in about 1799 and he died in 1860. When I started hunting around Rowan County, North Carolina in those years, it didn't take me long to find Philip Snyder. His father's name was Cornelius and the family came from Germany to North Carolina. There's a lot of material about this family and it's really kind of a cool story. It's just one problem. There were 2 Philip Snyders in Rowan County, North Carolina in the early 1800s. And this guy, Cornelius' son, he isn't the right guy. Completely different family. You see, if I'd stopped there, I wouldn't have done reasonably exhaustive research. I might waste a lot of time then learning really interesting things about perfectly nice people who aren't in the slightest bit related to me. Of course, that would never happen on typical school topics, right? Or will it? Now, let's say you're doing a paper about the link between, say, childhood vaccines and autism. You could find lots of sources that say there is a link. But then you'll also find ones that say there isn't a link at all. If you only use one set of those sources, you won't see the whole picture. And maybe you've assembled 25 sources here, and surely they're not all wrong, right? The problem with that is that a lot of times those sources are just copying each other. One source posts and then another quotes it and 2 others quote that one, and pretty soon you have a huge group of people who just keep repeating back the same wrong information to each other. It's sort of an echo chamber. This gets us to another part of reasonably exhaustive research. You not only have to look at a wide range of sources, but you need to focus on the best sources. In my case, I found the last will of Philip's grandfather. It made it really clear that Philip's father was George Snyder and not Cornelius. It was harder to find Grandpa's will than just to Google Philip Snyder, but it gave me much better information. Whatever the topic, I want to get the best sources and a reasonably wide range of them. If I'm researching that vaccine-autism connection, I might look at what Jenny McCarthy says on the topic. But despite her excellent credentials as a former co-host on The View, trusting Jenny is a lot like trusting the echo chamber. Neither one is the best source. Instead, I should read articles written for Time magazine or the Huffington Post reporting on some scientific study. But really, if I want to get the absolute best source, I'll read the actual scientific study. And to be truly exhaustive, I won't just read one scientific study, I'll read a wide range of them. Hang on! This is going to get huge. Let's say I'm writing a paper about cancer. Do you know how many scientific studies there have been on cancer in just say the last 5 years? Well, I don't either, but there would be a lot. And this is why you need to pick a reasonably narrow research question or topic. If it's too big for you to do reasonably exhaustive research, then it's too big. On the other hand, even if you restrict yourself to a reasonable topic, can you read absolutely everything? Absolutely not. I just did a search of my library's database for peer-reviewed journal articles on vaccine and autism over the last 5 years. I got 1,277 hits. I can't read 1,277 articles before I write my paper. Well, let's say I wade through those and eliminate 90% of them. That's still 127 articles. I can't read that many for a semester paper. Reasonably exhaustive research recognizes that humans have limits. There are thousands of documents in archives and courthouses that might shed some light on Philip Snyder. To say I've done exhaustive research will always be a lie. But if I do reasonably exhaustive research, either on an ancestor or on another topic like vaccines and autism, I can be proud of my work. Reasonably exhaustive research requires you to do two things. One, use high quality sources, the best you can get. Two, use a wide selection of those sources, as many as you can manage. Now, this is a cool grave marker. It's nice, but it's not the whole story of this cemetery. The whole involves hundreds and then thousands of markers and the same number of lives. Yes, you could just use the information that's nearby. It's easier. But there's a lot more out there that you'd be missing. Be thorough. Now that we've covered that first step in the GPS, reasonably exhaustive research, it's time to move ahead. At this point, I want to look at the second of the 5 elements in the Genealogical Proof Standard, or GPS, to see how it applies to other research. Number 2 is complete, accurate citations to the source or sources of each information item. My great-grandfather was mostly a farmer who spent a year or so fighting in the Civil War. I'm pretty sure that his contribution turned the tide for the federal forces. This guy, John W. Browning, grew up in Illinois before homesteading land in southern Missouri and then moving to Oklahoma. When he left Illinois, John hauled along his aging father, Andrew J. Browning. I know a good deal about both of these men. I also know a good deal about Andrew's father, Daniel Browning, but I cannot provide any kind of proof that Andrew is definitely Daniel's son. Here's what's so annoying about this thing. I've seen any number of internet genealogies, journal articles, and books that say that Andrew was Daniel's son. I think they're right, but none of them ever provides any proof. Maybe they had documentation, but they didn't bother to share it with the rest of us. There's a guy who lives in Florida who is, I suppose, a 47th cousin or something. He wrote this huge book with all manner of information about different families, including the Brownings. He connects Daniel and Andrew. I looked him up and sent him an email. "How do you know?" I asked, "that Andrew was Daniel's son?" His response, "I can't remember." Really, I can't remember. You've had this experience, haven't you? You read something on some website, or you see something on YouTube, or you hear it somewhere on the radio or TV or whatever. Then, a week later, you remember it, and you think, now where did I see that? You can't really trot it out with great authority, or you'll sound like one of those people who says, "Well, I've heard, blah, blah, blah," right? So here's the important thing that I need to do when I'm doing family history research, and you need to do when you're doing any kind of research. Whenever you get information, write it down and record your source. If you don't, you won't be able to go back to the library or to the web or wherever and find it later. But why is it such a big deal? Look, when somebody makes big claims about the health benefits of dehydrated kale, I'm going to ignore them unless they're willing to cite their sources. You see, by citing your sources, you give added credibility to what you're saying. When you don't cite your sources, then there's really no reason for me to take your claims seriously. Also though, by citing your sources, you leave the breadcrumbs that somebody can follow to continue your research. Then they don't have to start from scratch. They can take what you've done and start building there. It's also just possible that this somebody will be you as you look back after reviewing dozens of sources and say, where did I get that? But that's a lot of work. Yes, it is. And if you think that doing MLA or APA or Chicago documentation is complicated, you ought to see the weirdness that genealogy documentation can involve. It's a lot of work, but it is work that is worthwhile. Why? Because of the hazards of not doing it or not doing it right. Is it worth all that work if that's the price of having what you've discovered taken seriously? Of course it is. You can find all sorts of people making all sorts of claims. Space aliens in Congress, the M&M diet, the water-fueled engine. If they don't have some sort of proof that they can cite, I'm not going to waste my time with them. Is it worth all that work if it keeps future researchers, including you, from having to start at the beginning? I love walking down a research path that somebody has already traveled and cited. When you find those, you quickly confirm what they say and then start on fresh stuff. What if every computer designer in history had to go back to the very first computer and start over? You know, I'm going to reinvent the transistor. Do you think the computer that you have would have its current power? We know more than previous generations because we started with what they knew, and we know it because they wrote it down, and we can trust it because they documented it. One of these days, I hope to make that connection between Andrew and Daniel Browning. And when I do, rest assured that I will cite it and brag about it. Whatever research you do, make sure that you provide proper citations all along the way. You'll build up your credibility for yourself, and you'll create a record for future researchers, including yourself. Once, when I used to work here, we dug a grave. It turned out that we'd been given the wrong directions, and there was somebody else already buried there. Not making this up. Without the citation, the headstone, there was just no way of knowing. Document your work. That takes us through the first two steps in the Genealogical Proof Standard. They provide a good start for doing effective research in genealogy, but really, they're important to any research. We'll wrap up this video here, but be sure that you continue on through the other three steps in part 2, right here. If you enjoyed this, subscribe it, give me a thumbs up, and ring the bell. For now though, get out of here.